So, DLC Pack 1 for Breath of the Wild has landed. I have to say, I have mixed feelings because I feel like the DLC is actually pretty good. Um, it does stink that there are some things included in the DLC that in a past Zelda game would just be part of the package without any DLC necessary. Things like hard mode, although the hard mode they actually added some pretty clever things that the enemies will do, like ambush you from the sky with like their little flying rafts. I'm sorry, that's funny. that is really funny. There's the Trial of the Sword, which there's one shrine in the game on Eventide Island that has a really cool. It's the best shrine quest in the game. Period. It's so cool because you land on the island and you're stripped of everything except your Sheikah Slate, and you have to gather materials and survive. And I believe at one point you have to even beat a Hinox. You have to basically beat all the enemies on the island. And it's really fun. It kind of puts all your skills to the test, and they basically gave you a mega-sized version of that side quest with Trials of the Sword. It's an endurance run of sorts. I think you can actually save at certain points during it. There's some restrooms. You can gather materials, cook meals, that sort of thing. But you don't really know what's around the corner, so it's pretty intense from what I've seen of it. There is something called, it's like a map tracker. I don't know the exact term that they use, but basically the last 200 hours, if you've played that long, are recorded, and you can see your map just write out the route that you have taken. That's cool. I don't think that's one of those things that, they should have just included it from the first place. No, that's a pretty neat thing to have as an extra. And I want to say that they've also added a few other DLC costumes. You can dress as Tingle if you ever wanted to dress as Tingle. Why would you ever want to dress as Tingle? They include the Phantom armor. It's whatever armor that Zelda inhabits from.
That's pretty cool.
The Spirit Tracks game.
Phantom armor, yeah.
Yeah, Phantom armor. But and I'll get into those kind of later because those are, I think, the weakest part of the DLC. You get Majora's Mask, you can get Midna's Helmet, and I want to say,
Korok
the
mask.
Korok Mask, which is the only useful one, because Majora's Mask basically does whatever. It's basically like a monster mask, but it works on all the monsters. Because in the game you can buy a Bokoblin mask, a Lizalfos mask, and a Moblin mask, and a Lynel mask to basically go right up to those respective enemies and,
Kill
them. But you can also do other interesting things like escort them and weird things. But with Majora's Mask, it works on all of them, which that's pretty neat. The other ones, I don't think Tingles has anything. Also, the Phantom armor only gives you power, like attack up, which it's basically the same as the Barbarian's armor in the game. And I think Midna's armor is also an attack up, but it's just one piece, so not very helpful. The best one in the game is the Korok Mask, which, while I still think it's stupid that you can't just take a picture of a Korok and then have your Sheikah Shrine that's supposed to track items not be able to track where other Koroks are. Odd that that's not something you can find. But the mask will shake when you're near a Korok seed, so kind of useful, but at the same time could have made it a lot more useful if they wanted to. So I don't feel like those are very useful.
Since a lot of people compared Breath of the Wild to Dark Souls, there's a point in Dark Souls where you get so strong to the point to where you stop wearing good armor and you only wear things that make you look good. At that point, people like to call it fashion souls. So I believe that these are more of items just like, you know what? You probably have some of the strongest weapons in the game. You probably have all the heart containers you can ever ask for. Here's just stuff to make you look cool.
Yeah, it's just cosmetic at that point.
Yeah.
So this has kind of raised some, especially with the different masks and costumes that you can get with the new DLC pack. It's kind of raised some questions, further questions. We're still not all that sure about where in the fragmented timeline Breath of the Wild takes place. It's not really a matter of when, but which of the three timelines. And I'll break it down as quickly as I can. You've got three timelines that have existed since Ocarina of Time. You have the Fallen timeline, which results from Link losing to Ganon. That's important. Not Ganondorf, but Ganon. Link loses, dies, and Ganon proceeds to rule Hyrule. And then you, of course, get the series of games that include A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening, the Oracle games, Zelda 1, Zelda 2. Then you have the second timeline, which is called the Child timeline. That is Ocarina of Time. Link is victorious. He gets returned back to the Child timeline. Then you have the preceding games to be Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, and Four Swords Adventures. Which I don't see why that's important. Four Swords Adventures. Really?
It's fun.
But does it really belong in the timeline? Just have it be a random multiplayer Zelda game.
I'm sure what was that one that came out recently for the DS?
The Triforce Heroes?
Yeah, I'm sure that they'll fit that in the timeline.
Oh, I'm positive.
It's not even Zelda.
It's not Link.
It's not?
It's not Zelda or Link.
Oh.
You're simply called the hero. What's the other thing? Okay, and then the third timeline is the adult timeline, which is strange because you don't play as an adult during the adult timeline games. But that is the timeline which was created when Link defeats Ganon, but then goes back to the past, and then there's that future of just a defeated Ganon, but no Link. That's where you get Wind Waker,
all the
Phantom Hourglass,
the Toon Link games.
Yeah, with the exception of Minish Cap, which is during the Unified Timeline, and Four Swords Adventures, which is during... Yeah. The art style doesn't have a whole lot to do with stuff, which I'll kind of get into a bit with Breath of the Wild during that timeline, because, trust me, I have my own theories, too, on this. But yeah, that includes Wind Waker, the Phantom Hourglass, and the Spirit Tracks. So, the theories are, takes place, and everyone is pretty much in agreement because this has been stated by the game's director and by IG Aonuma that it's the latest game in the series. Like, it's at the very end of the timeline. Most recent. So, the three games in the Fallen... So, in the Fallen storyline or timeline, it is Zelda 2. Takes place... If it's in that timeline, it's after that one. Or it's after Four Swords Adventures in the Childhood or Child Link timeline. Or, yeah, you can grab that if you want. Good old Hyrule Historia. It's towards the beginning. Then the adult timeline would be sometime after Spirit Tracks. I want to say those are the three most recent games that this could be taking place after. So the theory for the adult timeline, Wind Waker Link, basically. People point to the fact that you have the Koroks, in Breath of the Wild, and you don't see Koroks in any of the other timelines. They also point to the fact that you find rock salt pretty much anywhere in the game at different elevations, and that would be evidence that at one point Hyrule was covered in seawater. So, and I want to say those are really the only two things that are pointed to. And by the way, just to kind of get this out of the way, you can't point to the amiibo outfits as like, oh, here's evidence that it's from this timeline, because there's stuff from every Zelda game. You also can't point to different locations in the game and saying that location is named after, Sahasrara from A Link to the Past, therefore this is in the Fallen timeline. You can't do that, because those are all, I would definitely call those references / Easter eggs, not evidence of this is where it takes place. Same thing for the amiibos. Yeah, so there's my theory on that. So don't even worry about the fact that Phantom Armor's in there or Majora's Mask, because I think the game even has a disclaimer basically stating that they're replicas. They're not the legitimate Majora's Mask, Phantom Armor, Tingle's outfit, etc. So I'm going to pick apart the adult timeline. So the Koroks, they point to the Koroks saying that, they're not in any other timeline. Well, I believe that it's in Wind Waker that the Deku Tree says that the Kokiri became the Koroks, and they did that to survive the flood.
Which is very weird.
Yeah. I'm just going to say that if Calamity comes upon Hyrule, that's just what they do. Calamity. That's an interesting word. Kind of like Calamity Ganon attacking 10,000 years before Breath of the Wild takes place. So literally, like, the Kokiri could have become the Koroks in any timeline. Just because they became the Koroks in the adult timeline doesn't mean that I would not point to that as evidence. Also, the rock salt that people point to, like, oh yeah, you can find rock salt at at any elevation, tops of mountains, whatever. You can find salt anywhere on planet Earth. It's a mineral. It is found everywhere. When it rains and it washes minerals off of mountains and the land into the sea gradually gets saltier. Salt is not just in the sea. Salt is everywhere. So you can't point to that.
Where is it in the west? It's like the Salt Plains.
The Salt Flats or something like that.
Yeah,
the Salt Flats. I want to say it's like in Death Valley or something like that. Now, of course, there's different viewpoints of how that salt got there, but I wouldn't say that that's evidence for this Hyrule version of Hyrule being flooded. And those are the only 2 points for adult timeline placement. So I think that's the weakest. I don't agree with that. Now, the Fallen timeline, people point to the fact, well, the Master Sword is found in a forest glade, just like it's found in A Link to the Past. You also have Link's tunic. The Tunic of the Wild looks very much like Link's outfit from the Fallen games. And while, see, that I think that's more of a reference to the original Zelda, because remember, Breath of the Wild during development, they were very much inspired by the original Legend of Zelda. They took a lot of elements from that. Even the look of the Guardians were basically taken from the Octoroks from the original Zelda. And one of the developers were like, yeah, I used to think that those things were huge, when compared to Link. So they took that idea and made the Guardians. So there's I would say A Link or I want to keep calling it A Link to the Past. It's just Legend of Zelda. The original Legend of Zelda was probably had the biggest inspiration, I would say, for Breath of the Wild. So the fact that his tunic looks similar to his tunic in the original game and the other games, I wouldn't really point to that as solid evidence either.
I mean, they all look fairly similar. There's like slight differences in all of them.
Right. But and actually for a while I thought maybe Breath of the Wild was a remake of the original Zelda. It's not. So that theory's out the window. I want to say okay, so the child timeline. This is where things get really interesting. So now while I did say that I feel like you can't really point to amiibos as evidence for timeline placement. It is interesting that this game has a ton of Twilight Princess references in it. I would say it has references to Twilight Princess more than any of the other games except maybe Ocarina of Time. It's like it seems like the three games that are referred to most in Breath of the Wild are Skyward Sword, Breath of the Wild, and Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time. I didn't rehearse this, okay? And
Breath of the Wild was inspired by Breath of the Wild.
Time loop. And the final game would be Twilight Princess. It is really interesting that you get the Wolf amiibo from the HD version of Twilight Princess, and he carries directly over to Breath of the Wild with his hearts. Now, and it does say that he, if he disappears, if you go too far from him, like let's say if you glide off of a cliff and he's on a cliff and you don't land for quite some time, because he'll warp to wherever you land. But if you go too far from him, he'll just go back to his own world. And I think at one point it says that he has there's like another dimension that he comes from.
The Twilight Realm.
Right. I think that's a direct reference to the Twilight Realm. And again, I don't think that that's solid proof that this is in the child timeline, but there's some other things you have to consider. There's I believe it's cutscene number 1 where Zelda is knighting Link. She mentions 3 specific events. She mentions him being in the skies, mentions him crossing time, and being in the embers of twilight. So, really big reference to those 3 games that I've listed. Skyward Sword, Ocarina of Time, and Twilight Princess, right? And I've watched a lot of YouTube videos now that I've beaten the game and trying to get some new ideas on the timeline placement. One guy said that, well, the Twilight Realm exists in all of the timelines. He's correct, because Hyrule is Hyrule. If there's a Twilight Realm in one timeline, it's going to be in another Twilight, or another timeline. The problem is what he thinks is the Twilight Realm is things like Lorule from A Link Between Worlds, or the Dark World in A Link to the Past, or Termina from Majora's Mask. No, Majora's Mask takes place in the same timeline as Twilight Princess. Termina is not the Twilight Realm.
Well, Termina doesn't exist.
Does it?
I'm one of those people that believes that he
Link
died. And
I won't throw that theory out because it is very compelling.
There's a lot of references to the 5 stages of accepting death.
Mm-hmm. Grief is what it is.
And also, in the timeline, Twilight Princess, you learn all the moves from
the Hero
of Time, or the Hero of Time knew from the Hero Shade, and he also could become a wolf. And a lot of people are like, "Oh, yeah, that's young Link because he died in the forest and became a Stalfos."
Problem with that, though, you fight someone who's taller than Link in Twilight Princess. I think he's obviously the hero from Ocarina of Time.
Yeah.
but he's an adult. So I think that's a big...
Well, he's a Stalfos.
Yeah, but do Staffels grow if they die as children?
I don't know.
I don't think so.
You don't have proof that they don't.
Yeah, but the burden of proof's on you. So I'm just saying, like, that's a big... But I'm not saying that the theory's completely out the window. Like, it's a very, very cool fan theory that I think holds a lot of water. So the only problem with that cutscene is that apparently in other versions of the game, not even versions of the game, just if you switch it to a different language, Zelda says different things that reference different games in other timelines.
Oh.
Like, I think the French timeline references him going across the seas. And I want to say, like, another language references... it might reference stuff like the Golden Land, which is specifically the Sacred Realm, what the Sacred Realm is called in A Link to the Past. So that would be the Fallen timeline.
Also, like, the Dark World and Lorule, those games take place in the same...
Yeah, they do.
It's the same place.
Yeah, Lorule is the Dark World. I'm pretty positive. Let's see, where are we at here? I'm doing this all mentally with bookmarks. So that's an interesting thing. Also, something that contradicts it being in the child timeline, although I think it's a weak contradiction, and I'll explain why. When you're going to Zora's Domain, there are these stones that basically carry the history of the Zoras. They say that they specifically mention Ruto awakening as a sage. And people say, well, if this is the child timeline where Ganondorf is captured before he even gets his hands on the Triforce, then there would have been no need for any of the sages to awaken, and she wouldn't have awakened. My response to that is, says who? It's kind of like the Korok argument. Like, the Kokiri could have turned to the Korok for other reasons, and Ruto could have turned into a sage for other reasons. Like, it didn't necessarily have to be to stop Ganondorf or Ganon later on. See, that's the thing about these theories, is that just because something, it's mentioned, this happened here or later on, it's not like, especially the one about Princess Ruto. Oh, also the Rito, the birds. So people point to those and say, well, you have the Rito, we're only in Wind Waker. But were they really Rito? Because they were half bird, half people. Like there's
Skyward Sword, something really weird happened
with those birds. That's right. The loft wings. No, I actually think that yeah, they're an evolved form of the loft wings. They look a lot more like loft wings than they do the Rito from Wind Waker. Now, I'm not 100% sure. I think if you're gonna pick one of the timelines, I do think the strongest argument is for the child timeline with the Majora's Mask, Twilight Princess, Four Swords Adventures timeline. There's a lot of other things, like the placement of the Temple of Time, and if you compare that back to like Ocarina of Time maps, one thing is that people get hung up on. I think they say, like, well, Hyrule Castle looks different. The Lake Hylia is different. The Bridge of Hylia is different. Elden Bridge, that's in a completely different location. But the thing is, like, you can't get too wrapped up on the landmarks. Except for, I think Temple of Time is the same in every game. Hyrule Castle, I think, is constantly being destroyed and rebuilt in different places. So just because Hyrule Castle looks slightly different here than it does in Twilight Princess, don't worry about it. It's probably not the same castle. In fact, it can't be the same castle because it's a lot bigger in Twilight Princess. So, all that to say, there is one theory, and I like it. I wouldn't have a problem with it if Nintendo comes out later and says, "Yeah, this is the actual placement of it." Is there is a convergence of all three timelines into one, and that's why there are references to all three timelines scattered everywhere. I feel like that kind of explains everything the most. Just it doesn't explain it very well. It's kind of like a loose connection. Because a timeline splitting, I can understand that. I cannot understand timelines converging and how you would remember three different histories and what would cause that convergence in the first place anyway.
I don't think it's, scientifically speaking, it's not possible. Because if the timelines is referencing the many worlds theory and
parallel universes.
Whenever a decision is made, there's a left and a right. And whatever happens, you either did left or right. And there's a universe where you did this thing, and there's a universe where you did that thing. And starting from just that point is just like an endless branching off, like possibilities of your entire existence. So, and at no point do they ever connect.
Right.
There could be like similar outcomes, but in the end, they're all going to be different from one way or the other.
Yeah.
Like the hero is triumphant. It's like there were two different ways that could have gone down. Just like I'm sure there's two different ways that like the hero failing could have gone, but
yeah, that
would have just been too many timelines. 3 arguably could be too many.
Well, and I mean, people, before Nintendo came out and said there was actually 3 timelines, people were arguing about there being 2 different timelines caused by Ocarina of Time.
Which makes the most sense. I don't know why there are 2 different ways that the hero... I don't know. It's weird the way...
Well, him going to the future and stopping Ganon and then being brought back to his childhood time by Zelda would leave like this empty space here. Oh, another reason. Here's another reason why I think it's in. Well, before I get to that, where do you think it takes place in? Which do you think it's one timeline, a convergence, or
the Breath of the Wild?
Yeah.
Don't believe it's convergence.
Do you think it's in one of them?
I would probably say the Child Era, because I think when the game first came out and you and Nathan played it together, I was like, oh, the Temple of Time. And then I think a week after we did that, I was like, it definitely takes place after Ocarina of Time.
Well, yeah. And
then everything after that, it makes a little bit more sense.
Yeah. And the Temple of Time, I want to say it only appears in Twilight Princess aside from Breath of the Wild and Ocarina of Time. So...
I think it's... Is it not in another game? I could have sworn there was another... Maybe I'm...
I don't think so.
Maybe I'm thinking of...
The...
things.
And I think a big clue as to... I think another supporting theory that I haven't really heard of people talk about with the childhood timeline, some evidence for it. Look at how... So Ganon / Ganondorf. So there is no Ganon in Skyward Sword. It is... I believe it's called Demise, which is like the opposing force to the goddess Hylia.
I think so.
And that's kind of where the whole curse of him being bound to Link and Zelda begins. You don't have Ganondorf until Ocarina of Time, which is also the first appearance of Ganon.
Yeah, because every other in the timeline it was Vadi before it was
Right.
Ganon.
Now the Fallen, and this is why for the Fallen hero timeline, it's important that Link actually defeats Ganondorf in his human form, but he loses to just the monster pig Ganon form of him, because in the Fallen timeline, that's the only version of Ganon you see. There is no Ganondorf in any of those games. You only see him, and he's kind of like a humanoid pig. He can talk. He has intelligence, but he still is mostly a beast. Whereas, and then when you see Ganondorf from in Wind Waker, he got the Triforce, but he was defeated. He was defeated by Link, 7 stages. He was sealed, and then he broke out of the seal. But he still has the Triforce of Power. For the child timeline with Twilight Princess, when he didn't get the Triforce in Ocarina of Time. He does. They still basically what they do is they kick him out of Hyrule, but he still manages to get a hold of the Triforce eventually, and then they try to seal him later, and that's when he kills one of the sages, and then they banish him to the Twilight Realm. He's Ganondorf. He didn't actually get the chance to turn into Ganon yet, but during the final battle with him in Twilight Princess, he does transform into Ganon, and you fight him as both a human and as a
Demon.
and as the beast form. But you finish Ganondorf off in the game, and you see the Triforce of Power leave his hand when he's pierced by the Master Sword. And a lot of people online were saying that signifies the death of Ganondorf the man. Now you just have the beast left. And that's exactly what we have in Breath of the Wild. We only have Ganon, or he's called Calamity Ganon because he's kind of like almost like a spiritual form of him. So that's the only form that's left of him. Whereas and I haven't played Phantom Hourglass or Spirit Tracks, so I have no idea if Ganon appears in those. I don't think he does.
Phantom Hourglass is something completely different. It's an entirely new evil force that doesn't have to do with Ganon or Vadi.
Okay, and I think it's the same for Spirit Tracks. I don't think there's any Ganon in there.
Yeah, Phantom Hourglass doesn't even mention him. The
wow.
enemy. But in Spirit Tracks, Demon King Malladus is resurrected.
Malladus, that's right, but it's not Ganon.
No, it's just a little. No, it wasn't even. No, it was no. Crap, I can't remember because there's like a little demon dude, and then there's like his assassin friend, and then his assassin friend betrays him, and then he kills him off, and then you go to like a weird train hell, and then you fight big demon train, and then you fight a person.
So yeah, I'm the Convergence timeline. Like I could accept that because that would explain a lot of the references across all 3 games, and that would kind of be like the cleanest explanation, even though it kind of boggles the mind. But I think if it's only one, I think the strongest evidence, like you, is in the child timeline. Especially when you throw in the whole, what's Ganon like? Because in the Fallen game, or the Fallen hero timeline, like he's nothing like that. And if you recall, Zelda 2, Ganon's killed by Link in Legend of Zelda, and then Zelda 2 is basically the minions of Ganon trying to resurrect him. And they can't do that without the blood of Link, so...
I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but in Four Swords Adventures, they have the reincarnation of both Ganondorf and Vadi. So Ganondorf is resurrected.
Ganondorf?
Ganondorf.
Because I know Ganon is in the game.
Ganondorf. It says Ganondorf.
I'll have to check into that, because
then again, that's entirely on how you want to view Four Swords Adventure as a different game from Four Swords. Because in Four Swords, it's just the resurrection of Vadi. But in Four Swords Adventures, it says the resurrection of Ganondorf and the resurrection of Vadi. So.
I guess I'll have to look into that because that's interesting. And I always thought it was weird. I was like, really? It takes place during the child timeline after Twilight Princess? It looks like it either belongs in it looks like it belongs in either of the other ones. Like it could fit into Fallen a lot better or adult timeline, but those are our thoughts on this ever deepening debate.